From Studio C in the 511 Studios in the Brewery District, located in downtown Columbus, Ohio, this is Note to Future Me. I'm Brett Johnson, owner of Circle 270 Media Podcast Consultants. Note to Future Me is dedicated to interviewing businesses and organizations who have implemented podcasting into their marketing strategy. But in this episode, I'm taking a sidestep. I got to interview Dino Tripodis, host of the podcast Whiskey Business, and former longtime morning show co-host on WSNY Sunny 95 in Columbus, Ohio. Also in the studio with me was Steve Palmer, main host of the podcast Lawyer Talk and owner and partner at the law firm of Yavitch Palmer in Columbus, Ohio, as well as the owner of 511 Studios. Okay, now you're thinking, what do we three have in common? Radio and podcasting. Dino, of course, with his years on air and his podcast. Steve is now entering year number 2 with the podcast and has been a radio advertiser and has been a part of a morning radio call-in show on 99.7 The Blitz for over 10 years. And I'm a 35-year-plus radio broadcast veteran with experience from on-air to sales. I have been itching to cover this topic for a long time, and I have 2 great guests to talk about it. How radio is either missing the boat about podcasting or has seen the light about podcasting. We 3 have different viewpoints coming from 3 different perspectives, and it really made a great recording session. Thanks for coming along for the Bend and Focus. I think you're going to enjoy this insider's view. And as always, thanks for taking notes with me. As you've heard in my past episodes, I've gone the theme of businesses and podcasting. And this episode, I want to kind of take a sidebar. With my background in radio, as you well know, as a listener to my podcast, I want to occasionally address the radio and podcasting theme and its weaknesses, its strengths, its existence at all, if nothing else. And I thought this episode would be great to do because I've got 2 radio experts, generals.
You do?
I do.
If you're talking about me.
I was like, okay, we're here. When are the other guys coming?
We've got Dino Tripodis, who is, first off, the host of Whiskey Business podcast. I'm going to give the podcast the vote of confidence first, as well as former morning show co-host for a local radio station in Columbus, Ohio, WSNY Sunny 95, as well as Steve Palmer, who is the owner of law firm Yavitch Palmer. And you kind of go, well, attorney, what's the deal? Well, anyway, he is the host of Lawyer Talk Off the Record podcast, as well as a longtime radio advertiser on a local station in Columbus, the Blitz 99.7 FM. And I think we all 3 can bring 3 different perspectives to radio and podcasting that I want to explore. Because I have my opinion. I know Dino has his. I know Steve has his. And I think it should be fun. Let's, though, go this route first. Give a little bit about your background, Dino, in regards to what you've done with your life up until this point, as well as how the Whiskey Business podcast came about.
What have I done with my life? That's a good question. That's it. You know, I think my mother asked me that same question just a week ago. What have you done with your life? 24 years at Sunny 95.
Okay.
It was the only radio job I had ever had. I came into it as a comedian doing stand-up. I was a guest on their show as a comedian. And then I'll skip a lot of the minutia, but there was an opening to work there as a co-host with another gentleman who at the time was hosting the show, Bob Simpson. I reluctantly took the job thinking, this is going to be one of those, it's nice when he visits, it's not going to be so nice when he's there all the time situations. That show was good, but didn't work. The following year, they let Mr. Simpson go, and I thought they were going to let myself and Stacey McKay go as well at the end of the year, because that happened in October. Come January, they sat us down and said, we'd like you to be the new morning show. And once again, I thought, okay, they'll come to their senses and realize they made a horrible mistake. And 24 years later, I was still there. But I did leave in June of 2018. I did. Right. Yeah. 24 great years, great station, and just a great run.
Mm-hmm. And the Whiskey Business podcast came about through that time period then too, right?
Sunny 95 or Saga Communications, Columbus Radio Group, whatever you want to call them, started to see that podcasting was becoming a thing, and digital media was becoming a thing as well. And they started to hop on it and wanted to take advantage of the opportunities that were in there, in respects to sales, and making money. So they approached, Stacy first. She does a podcast called Momcast, which is very popular and very good. And they asked me if I wanted to do a podcast. At first I said, I don't know. And I thought, okay, if I did one, what would it be? What do I like? What do I know? And we came up with Whiskey Business, which I did not want it to be a podcast about whiskey so much as it, and that's our tagline. Not so much a podcast about whiskey as it is one with whiskey. So the only running theme in our podcast is we share a different bottle of whiskey every week with a different guest. We don't claim to be experts in whiskey. There are far more knowledgeable men and women out there who know their whiskey than I do, but we do learn a little bit about the bottle. And then what's really fun is the conversations that we have. Our guests run from A to Z as far as topics. We've had lawyers on the show. We've had a couple of attorneys.
All right.
3 of them. As I said 2, 3. I think you probably know them all.
Yeah, I think I do. We talked a little bit off the air about that, or before we were recording.
Yeah. So, and they've all had, and one of them has a podcast as well, Alex Hasty.
Yeah, Alex is a friend of mine, and he's been on our podcast.
Yeah, Ohio v. the World.
Yeah, great podcast, actually.
Yeah, he's been on ours 3 times. So, yeah, small world, smaller city, I always like to say.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, Columbus is one of those cities where if you just start poking around, sooner or later you're going to find people that know people that know people that know you, and the chains get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, there's like 3 degrees of separation as opposed to the
7.
classic 6.
Yeah,
Whatever it
yeah,
is.
exactly.
Yeah. So, Steve, let's talk a little bit about how you got into doing the podcast, but also your history with advertising with the Blitz, and how that kind of all transitioned to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really just a criminal defense lawyer.
Oh, just a criminal defense lawyer.
But what's interesting is, back that you were talking about Blazer, and I started going on the Blitz with Blazer and Mo years ago. This is about 2006 or 7. And my partner, who's now deceased, Eric Yavitch, he was cruising home one day, or cruising into the office one day, and there was actually because it was morning, and he hears Mo griping about getting a speeding ticket in the city of Dublin. And it was classic Mo shtick, where he was, black man in Dublin, here I go. Mm-hmm. Now they're going to get me. What I need is a good Jewish lawyer. I got to get. So Yavitch, who was my partner at the time, calls in and says, I'll represent you for free. And that spawned a couple phone calls. Next thing I know, we're going into the station to talk about representing Mo in a speeding ticket. And we had a charity going on. We were going to sell some raffle tickets for charity. And we walked in, and I remember, I think it was Blazer came up and said, you guys want to do maybe a little phone-in question and answer legal advice? And I said, well, sure. Why not? Why not? And next thing I know, here I am a decade later. I've been doing that same phone-in show weekly now for almost 10 years. Now, it went off the air while the Blitz took their hiatus, their morning show.
The old Coke, new Coke experiment, right?
Yeah, they changed brands a couple times and then came back. But ultimately, after I bounced around to QFM, and then I think I went over to CD 101 for a while. That was a failure. And then I ended up back at the Blitz, and here we are. So along those lines, I mean, what I thought, here's what I started doing about radio advertising. I never cared about it, to be perfectly blunt. It didn't make any sense to me. I never understood it. I never thought I would hire a lawyer who's got a commercial on the radio. But what happened is when I started doing that phone-in legal advice, people started calling me, hey, you're the guy on the radio.
Well, it becomes, you take it a step further, when you actually become now just, you're more than just a radio commercial. You've, whether you realize or not, have become a personality.
Yeah, you bet.
So, and that's far more identifiable than just a spot on the radio.
Yep. And you guys know that from your, I didn't even and no experience with radio or doing anything. In fact, I used to be scared to death to walk in there.
Me
It's probably the same thing. Like when you just pitch, like, hey, you want to be on our show? You're like, sure. How does this work? And now I get to the point where, every few weeks I'll be checking out at Kroger or at one time at Harbor Freight, and somebody says, do I know you? And here I am wearing a ball cap backwards. I've been working in my yard. I'm sweaty. I'm whatever. And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't. And she, are you on a radio? And I was like, well, yeah, I happen to. You're the lawyer on the radio. So, and that's where the advertising component shakes hands with me being on. But whether I always looked at the advertising as an opportunity for me to be on the air and share my personality, who I am, how I do things, and that is the best advertising I've got as far as radio goes.
And there's other attorneys who have radio spots, but don't you think because you do that phone in and that segment that it elevates you a little bit? Because that's how I think it transfers or translates into the mind of the consumer. Well, I heard a lawyer spot for that guy, but this guy actually has a show.
Yeah, he's on the radio.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of reinforces the brand. The radio spots are usually my voice, so it reinforces my voice. And it works only because I've got both.
Yeah.
It works well.
Right.
With all due respect, you have a good voice. Over the 24 years that I've did radio, there'd be clients that would want to voice their own spots, and like, okay, that's not really a good idea.
Exactly.
Right.
But you have a good voice.
Right.
So.
Well, thank you.
And with your gig on the air, you're the first one to defer. I'll get you in contact with somebody. I don't know the answer to that, or I'll take a good stab here, but you need to call. That is cred.
Yeah. And
beyond belief.
I learned this a long time ago, is that I learned it at the dinner table, right? Where if you don't know, you say you don't know, and you become intelligent or smart when you realize you don't know anything. And what I do is really all about problem solving, and I look at my job that way. So if somebody calls in, I don't act like a know-it-all if I don't know it. I just say, listen, here's what I think is going on. Let's put you in touch with the right person. You need a roof, we'll get you a roofer. You need some plumbing, we'll get you a plumber. You need a lawyer that does probate, we'll get that person. And that, I think that does, if there's young lawyers listening, you should follow this advice. Understand what you don't know, and it's okay not to know, right? You don't need to know everything.
Right.
So that's the trick. And then focus on solving the problem, however that is.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you got started with the podcast then, which I love the story.
Yeah, we would come, I said for years, remember when reality TV hit? This is back in late 90s. All of a sudden, all these reality TV shows. Well, Eric Yavitch and I were sitting in our office, and we said, we ought to have a reality TV show, because we get back from court and we're just spent. And it's that slap-happy time of the day when you start just doing funny stuff. I thought, man, a reality show would love this. And then when I started doing the radio show, I thought, I'd love to have my own radio show. And I said sort of rhetorically, man, if I could just make a living doing radio, I would do that. And Jeff Lynne, who now has been with me for a long time, is of the next generation, and he listens to Rogan and all these podcasts. And I said, podcast? What the hell is that? I do the radio show.
It's the future.
It's the future.
Right.
And he said, we got to do a podcast. So I thought, well, all right, one of these days we'll do one. Well, Brett, you're sitting outside the studio one time after on a Wednesday.
Like a vulture.
He was a vulture. He's got a stack of these circle something cards. And we started talking about podcasts. And I said, it's funny, because I've been, Jeff Lynne, my guy, we've been talking about doing this now for months. And, that's the thing, is that I didn't have I didn't have the knowledge to actually push it over the goal line. I could talk about it, I could do it, but I was somewhere on the 50-yard line. I mean, I was like, the thought of actually figuring out how to record something, how to get it.
I'm with you there. Yeah. If not for an excellent producer, there'd be no whiskey business.
Yeah. I mean, it's a confusing, complicated mess. And then getting it to podcast land, I didn't even know what that was. I've heard people trying to write apps for Apple, and I'm like, that's impossible. You can't do that. But it was your expertise, Brett, that sort of gave us that push to get it actually started and going.
All right. And then Dino was asking about, okay, studio looks great down here. How this start up? Talk about the development of the 511 studios.
What is this little
this little oasis.
niche of audio nirvana doing down here in this legal building.
Yeah, you walked into my law office, and then I'd bring you down to this little this studio. So we were doing the podcast at a conference table in my office upstairs, and I bought the building a couple years ago from my mentor, a guy named Bill Meeks, who's passed away. But as we did this podcast, I bought a microphone. I thought, all right, I've spent what I need to spend. I bought a microphone. I got this, maybe I'll do it on my phone and record digitally. And then I bought a better digital recorder. And then I bought another microphone. And then I bought another microphone.
It's crack.
It is.
It's audio crack.
Yeah. And all the time he's asking me, what do you think about this? And like, yeah, if you want to go that direction, that's really good stuff. If you want to do that, that's okay. And you'll love it. So we get kicking around and he wants to look at these EVs. And I said, I got one. I'll bring it down. You can listen to it. You can listen to A, B, do the A/B test. He plugs this bad boy in. He goes, I'm sold.
And, at the radio, there's a certain sound, and you guys know this better than I, but I had no idea that there was a sound associated, and by sound, I mean a mix or whatever the hell it is, associated with on-air radio, broadcast radio. And I got addicted to that in the headphones over at the studio at 99.7. And I just, anything short of that in my own podcast seemed inadequate, I guess. So Brett comes out, he's over, and Brett, we come down here in the basement in this room, and there's chairs stacked to the ceiling, literally. Chairs. I bought the building furnished. I need a place to store all the crap. So there's chairs stacked to the ceiling, and I said, I'm thinking about maybe building a studio down here. And, one thing led to another. I put paneling up. I got the right kind of sound stuff. I started building acoustical panels. We bought monitors, bought a mixing board. I didn't like that, so I bought another one. I got these amps, so I needed preamps to run, or these mics, so I needed preamps to run the mics. And then we thought, well, we might as well have the ability to put it on TV.
Sure, why not?
So now we can do streaming. We got 5 cameras mounted that around our little round table here that everybody can be on a camera at all times. We can mix the video for people. So
because we just started doing YouTube videos as well. Now, not as sophisticated as these 5 mounted cameras. We have 2 GoPro cameras that are filming myself and my guest. And then I want to do a little shout out, if I can, please, to my producer, Greg Hansberry, who I'd be lost without, and also the producer of our YouTube videos, director John Whitney, who is a filmmaker, collaborator, and just wanted to join in on the fun. So he edits down the YouTube videos as well. But yeah, I mean, we went from the studio at Sunny when we had the podcast over there, and now we're at my house, and we have some of that equipment, that early equipment that seems to suffice for us right now. But this, I don't, but there's also something to be said. And like I said, it comes down to, a great producer. They mix it really well and do a great job with it. And there's something about the ambiance of doing it from my home. It's in my bar, and there's just something very comfortable about the atmosphere of it. I think we would lose something now if we left that particular place now. Could I make it more sound pleasing? Probably. I could probably do some things. And we did one in the basement one time too, which Hansberry immediately said, the acoustics down here are even better. Yeah. We should do it down here all the time. Like, well, whatever. I don't know. But
I'm the talent. Right?
I don't know. Don't tell me. And plus, as far as how it sounds, you probably have the benefit of a better ear. Brett, you're probably hearing deficient on some level in one of these ears after all your years of radio.
A little bit.
Yeah, I know I am for sure.
Really?
So, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it's conveniently so.
Yeah. No, it's like, you said what?
And sometimes it's actual. Yeah. But, this is great. This is great.
Yeah, it's a neat place. And you know what happens down here? It's become a think tank for us. It's become a place where not only we record our show, but we talk about stuff down here, whether it's being recorded or not. We solve problems down here. I mean, this is my little escape in the middle of the day to come down and either record a show, hang out, or do whatever, stuff like we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And it is, I love it down here. I don't regret any of it, right? I mean, it's the only thing I can think is, how can I make it better?
Right.
That's I'm always thinking about that.
Right.
Talking to 2 radio guys, we got ways you can
exactly. There you go.
It sounds like I need your production team. I got all this fancy equipment. I don't know how to use
a lot of fancy equipment.
Right. what kind of support did you get? We talked a little bit before we recorded from the radio station group. I know they approached you. They wanted you to do one. So from that day forward, yep, I'm cool. I'm going to do this. Well, what kind of support did you get from them? I mean, frustrations and good and bad. Talk about that.
First of all, they gave me carte blanche as far as content. There wasn't any what I like to call sunny restrictions.
Sure. Yeah. Right. As you weren't on air with it.
I wasn't on air. It was, since it's on the internet. Right. So we didn't have to worry so much about content, language, et cetera, et cetera. Supportive in that they ran spots for the podcast on a regular basis. And once again, part of that was when we had sponsors, they kind of had to. Mm-hmm. I think where they dropped the ball and was in sales. I don't know if there are salespeople in radio that might be listening to this. You need to embrace the future, which is digital media, and find a way to sell it. If it seems like it's a small potatoes package to sell to one person for X amount, it's not. I'm sorry if it's not Giant Eagle or Kroger or one of the big car dealerships where, you're going to make a lot of money, but you need to wrap your head around the fact that it's not going anywhere. In fact, it's growing as we speak. And by not trying to sell it, you're missing out on dollars. Mm-hmm. You are personally, so is your radio station. Yeah. There's a lot of money to be made in digital media from an advertising perspective. And I think that's where I won't say they didn't support it.
Right.
But I don't think they went at it as aggressively as they could have.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the salespeople could not wrap their heads around this small little thing where you just talk about whatever you want and that's it. It goes out on the internet and it's not on the radio. It's not actually on the radio.
You're not a big boy, you just got your little basement thing. But here, I think your words of wisdom are really, really true, and that is they better jump on board, or somebody like me will, right? Or somebody like with a studio here will do it, because having spent a lot of dollars on radio advertising, I see it both ways. I can see that, all right, if you're the big boy, I don't know what the big boys would spend. I don't know what a big car dealership would spend on the radio as far as advertising, but it's a monthly fee, I suspect, and it's probably high. And then you get to a point where what is the return on that? And if you could get the same return on a popular podcast for half the money, eventually the big boys are going to start bailing. They're going to go over to the podcast lane. Mm-hmm. So I sort of see it like maybe not only the radio advertiser or the salespeople, but maybe even the radio stations themselves better start thinking they should start cashing on some of those dollars. But.
Well, and I get it too, but it's the blinders mentality. I mean, you don't know how you can find out how many people are listening to your podcast, but the fact that there are X amount of radio stations in Columbus, Ohio, compared to the literally thousands of podcasts, hundreds of thousands of podcasts that are out there and available to consume. So I can see where an advertiser might go, well, how are we going to cut through? There's 500,000 podcasts out there. Yeah, well, there are, but really, there's really only 200,000 of those who are actually active on a regular basis. And then only 50% of those are actually good.
Yeah.
And so the number starts to get down to, a smaller amount. If you take that model and you break it down to what's available here in Columbus as far as a local advertiser, and the fact if you can convince them that it's just not going out to Columbus, it's going out everywhere.
Sure.
You might have listeners in Columbus that are dedicated listeners that will good, but your name, your brand is going everywhere.
Right? Yeah, you bet. And what does that correspond with? Internet sales, right?
Right.
It's like a stick and mortar store is not so important anymore. Even car dealers. I was shopping for cars recently, and I realized quickly I wasn't looking at a dealership in Central Ohio at all. It was somewhere out of state, and they were marketing all over because it didn't seem weird to me to go travel somewhere to buy a car, and that's not even mail order. So if I got a mail order product or any sort of or any product I can ship, A podcast is limitless as far as who you can reach. I mean, it really is limitless if you get a good one. And I'm curious. You were a professional DJ, and then you make a shift to podcast. And did you catch any flack in the business that way? Is that like do people think, all right, now you're just a podcaster, you're not a professional one? But how many people are making that transition?
I don't know. As far as what people think, is podcasting some sort of
is it a lesser
bastard child
retirement home for
where you go
on air personalities?
When you're done with radio, you go into podcasting.
Exactly.
Well, there's some truth to that, because as I mentioned before, it seems like everybody's got a podcast.
Yeah.
I make a joke that the sixth grader that lives down the street from me has a podcast about boy bands and bracelets, and has more and has more listeners than I do. Yeah. I mean, it seems like everybody's got a podcast, but by the same token, no, I don't think I haven't gotten any flack about it being lesser than, mainly because I think I was doing it while I was on the air.
Yeah.
So
sure.
When I first started, so like the first solid year and a half, they were married hand in hand. It was my choice to take the podcast with me when I left. That was one of the arrangements that I made, for lack of a better word, that I wanted to take the podcast and all the proprietary rights and all the intellectual property that's associated with whiskey business with me, because I wanted to possibly take it a step further. And since they weren't really doing anything with it, right?
Yeah.
Sales wise, it seemed like, let them have it.
Right.
And I think eventually that, I heard this, Brett, that Howard Stern was sort of jesting a little bit about Rogan's podcast. Like, oh, he's just he's a podcaster.
Really?
And Howard Stern's been the radio guru forever. He's made tons of money doing it. Then he shifted to satellite radio or digital, whatever that's called now. And then he was sort of poking at Rogan, like, what's he do? He's not making any money. He's not doing anything. It's like, but he is, right? I mean, it's like,
you bet he is.
It's like the hare and the tortoise. You better watch out.
Yeah. He's Rogan's doing very well. There's some good podcasts.
And guess who's in the press right now? Rogan is. Stern ain't.
Yeah, no, it's exactly
Stern
right.
gets talked about very, very little anymore.
But he doesn't care. He's made his money,
I suppose.
Yeah. But
he's not
like,
in that stage of the game. Right?
But what's happening is that you've got like Ben Shapiro. He's making tons of money on his little podcast. You've got Rogan making lots of money. And there's dozens of guys that that are taking this format and making it work financially. Yeah. And I think sooner or later the sponsorship money or the advertising money will have to follow.
Yeah, and coming from my background, just recently exiting a local radio station group after, I've been in the radio for over 35 years, but 20 years there, in sales. But I also did some on-air promotions and such. So I've been on both sides of the building, let's put it that way. And leaving there, I can tell you, at least from an industry standpoint, it has to come from top down. Mm-hmm. And if owners don't get it, the rest of the building won't get it either. And I know a lot of it's coming from the programming, and it sounds as though in your situation, Dino, you was welcome. That's great. But a lot of program directors take a look at this as if they're listening to a podcast, they're not listening to my radio station. Bottom line, it's an economy of time that you only have X amount of hours per day. So if you're going to spend it with podcasts, I don't get you as a PPM, as a portable people meter person, and you're not a listener.
God, don't get me started on PPM.
And so they're not seeing it as an extension, a brand extension for the radio station. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I walked out of. Exactly what I walked out of, because I was the only one with the instigating and pushing forward any podcasting there. I leave and it's dying on the vine. It's amazing. And they're not grabbing a hold of this and understanding what's going on with it. And that's partly why I left.
It's almost like big tobacco saying we're not going to vape.
I get called from businesses who want a podcast, and I hook up studios. I don't use radio stations. Why would you not think a business would call a radio station? They have the equipment.
Yeah, it's all right there.
It's all right there, but they don't get the calls, Dino. They don't get the calls. I get the calls.
Good.
It doesn't make any sense. If you think you're going to make it video, you call TV, right?
Yeah.
They got the equipment. Radio may have missed the boat. They may have missed the boat.
They're missing the boat. I think there's still time for them to get another boat and swim out to that boat
and
get on it. But they are missing the
right.
boat as we speak. Have they missed it completely? I don't know, because what I do see some stations across the country that do embrace it.
Yes, they are. You're right.
There are some that are embracing the podcast and encouraging their personalities, their morning show personalities, their afternoon to do them, in addition to whatever they're doing on the show, to add more layers to who they are and what they're all about. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and in your situation, Steve, as well, I think stations are missing the boat that they're not training their sales reps to take a look at, okay, who on your list of advertisers could be prime for a podcast outside of what they do, just exactly what you do with yours.
Sure.
Exactly what you do. And that's where a sales rep can make money.
And you would think a radio station could bring a lot of value and force to that equation, right? So it's like, we're going to help you get your podcast started. Come to our studio. Just come to this one. It's empty over here. We got the voice processors. It'll be everything. You don't have to worry. You can do what held me back. They can supply for people, which is I had trouble getting my head around actually making it happen with the equipment. How do I record? How do I get it up to podcast? How do I do all these things? Which, in practicality, once you figure it out, it's doable, but it's the kind of hurdle that prevents people from doing it. But somebody like you now is going to do it and help people do it. And, radio stations could do that and then use their station to help you promote it. Right. And that, I think that could generate dollars for, a radio station, but what do I know?
I mean, how different do you think it is? Let me ask you this. There are people that, like the radio station will sell time for these, shows.
Right.
These, where clients come in and do a half-hour show, and basically they're just pushing their product.
Long-form programming, basically. Yeah.
And they're usually air on a Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon. How is that any different?
It's not, other than they're on at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning.
Right.
And at 8:29, the show is gone.
It's gone. It's done. And this one, with the podcast, you're doing it, and then
even if it's repurposing that long form program, that's okay. But a real-time radio, it's gone forever. It's out in ether space.
And that's a good point. That's like I had to face this in another media, which is the internet. I mean, I'm almost 50 now, 48. I'll be 49 in May.
I got psychological issues older than you, but go ahead.
I hear you. But I built my law practice the old-fashioned way, right? I would go to happy hours, or I would go meet people or on the golf course, or doing stuff like this, or just shaking hands, or actually, frankly, just being good at what we did at that time was a huge, that's what drove business into my doors. And then there came a time after 2008 particularly, when the market sort of crashed, that everybody and their mother was going to be a criminal defense lawyer. And what they were good at was internet marketing. And they could go grab DUI cases. They could grab the misdemeanor stuff, or even some bigger felony stuff, and get paid some money. And people out there didn't know any better. They would just click and say, "Oh, this is a good website. I'll go talk to this guy, and if he or she or this gal, they got this right sales pitch, they'll hire him." And that became a whole different competitive market for me. And you either get along or go along, right? You got to jump on and start doing it. So we had to build a web page. We had to start doing some search engine stuff just to keep up. And it sounds like radio is sort of in that same mode, where the old and the new are sort of spreading apart here faster than maybe is healthy. And I think ultimately, if the target audience or the target dollars are people who have them to spend on advertising, just look at the generation coming up behind us, guys. I mean, they're doing everything online. They're doing everything digitally. They're doing everything. They don't want to waste time finding a radio show that's on Sunday morning. They're going to just Google it.
Right.
And if it doesn't show up, it's gone. Like you said, it's done. It's interesting.
I mean, I just think there's still value in terrestrial radio as far as advertising.
I agree.
I've heard that death bell so many times over the last 24 years. And it's just not true. I mean, terrestrial radio has its place in this communication world, but you've got to be aware of what's coming, and not what's coming, what's here.
Yeah. And I think this was an opportunity. It's not, and I agree, it's not gone yet. I get sarcastic with it, but I think radio has and had such an opportunity to be in front of the curve for once with podcasts and embrace it. Just recently, there was a large conference of podcasters called Podcast Movement, and it's been going on. It's grown by thousands every year, and it's only about 4 years old. And so this year, they invited radio to be a track of it as well, too. And radio is on one side, podcasters on another, and the two did not mix. They did not mix. And you heard comments after the conference that radio people did not want to talk to podcast people. They had different meetups, and there was again, it's that redheaded stepchild attitude. Overall, there's but you said though, there are some groups that get it and are moving forward with it, but it's still that stigma that it's
too bad, because I got to be honest with you. When I started podcasting while I was still at the radio station, it actually made me a better broadcaster.
Yeah.
Because with podcasting, you don't have the restrictions of time.
Right.
You can talk at length. You're not worried about getting to the next stop set of commercials or the latest Maroon 5 song, whatever the case might be.
5 songs an hour or whatever.
Whatever was going on. It made me, when I started doing the podcasts when I'm still at the station, made me a better interviewer and consequently a better broadcaster, and also made me think out of the box a little bit more. So yeah, the two definitely, if you're in radio and you're podcasting, you should definitely marry those two together and become a force.
Right.
Because it only benefits you.
And you've done the same thing with Lawyer Talk. You've had strategy, even if it's not really called a strategy meeting, you guys are planning out episodes way in advance. Where do you want to go? Hey, let's add an extra one on Friday. Let's do this. Let's focus on this. But all back toward branding Yavitch and Palmer.
Yeah, you know what I
Bottom
found
line
is here's what's fascinating to me. Here's how it works for me. Somebody calls me and says, how'd you find me? And to help you with your drunk driving case or your federal drug case or whatever crime it is. And more and more I was hearing, well, I heard you on the radio, and I just always thought you're very honest, and you just tell people like it is. You just cut through all the BS.
Cut through.
Right.
And I looked you up on the internet, and then so my buddy recommended you, or some other referral source, and all of that almost always originated at that radio show, and it gave me an opportunity to share who I am and give people a glimpse of what the experience would be. Not that I'm great, but just everybody's individual, and you got to see that as opposed to some web page or some video or something that is not so free flowing. And now I just thought, I got a podcast. I can do this anytime I want. I can go, look, a big issue. There's a new drunk driving law. Let's just go talk about it. And people can hear us talking about it. And if that generates business for me, great. If it doesn't, great. But I can do that without, like you said, without restriction. I don't have to.
And I think the other thing you have going for you is something that I always stress to people who are thinking about starting to do podcasts. You have consistency. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. You're consistent. You put out a product on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And when I mentioned those 500,000 podcasts that are out there, and only, how many of them are actually active and regular and consistent? Not that many. In the big picture. And I think consistency is a key to the success of it all too. You've got to keep putting something out there. We've had more than 75 podcasts because we're on our 75th bottle of whiskey.
At some point, you're going to run out of breaks.
No. Are you kidding me?
Oh,
no.
Fun.
The whiskey business will fall by the wayside before I ever get to every whiskey that is out there.
It is a good goal, though.
It's a good goal. It's a good goal. But we've had a lot of two-parters and we've had what we call whiskey shots when you talk about the consistency. If we can't get a whole podcast out on any given week, we do something called whiskey shots, which are just short little little tidbits that are fun to kind of just keep the flow going. Trust me, we finished up our holiday show, holiday two-parter, in the middle of December and let that two-parter run through the end of the year. I'm going crazy because I've not done a podcast in, it would have been like 3 weeks. Yeah. And I'm like jonesing to get back on the mic and do a podcast because I feel we've been down too long. You know what I mean? And
you do feel like if you're not doing something, somebody else is. It's getting stale or something else. It's like a vacuum, man. Something's filling it up. And what surprised me is that it is not easy. You know, it's like you've got to constantly, or I have to anyway, constantly contemplate what is next. What is going to be the next topic? What's another thing we can talk about? Because as much as when I first sat down, Brett, and thought, well, I could do a podcast. I could do one every day if I wanted to. All right, well, that you can do your first little run. That's about 2 weeks. Right.
And a lot of people forget.
And that's exactly how the end point is about 3 or 4 episodes. 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's done. And they kind of go.
So what do you do? You're in radio where you talk for like 2-3 minutes and then that's all you have to do. And we work like 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah, right.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
I do that. I do talk for 2 and 3 minutes at a time for 4 hours a day. But
my butt's here at 4 o'clock in the morning prepping for this
4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it consistently and well for 24 years. You're right. It's not easy.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
I have more respect for you guys now than ever. And as I go in every Wednesday still and look at Loper and Randy and everybody else on that show, what they do, it's like he's great at it. They are great at it, but it is not without hard work. I mean, they put in their time and they've got their clipboards and they actually ponder what is going to happen next. And as much as they make it sound like it's just all easy and free flowing, it is not. A lot of work and effort goes into that from both the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain. Right?
Sure. A lot of hard work goes into making something sound and look easy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
People forget that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's your answer to radio, Dino? You get a radio exec saying, okay, we want to make this podcast thing work. From your perspective, you've been on the air for over 20 years.
How do they want to make it work? They want to sell it?
Yeah.
They want to sell it? Because
it always comes down to the dollar. It always does. So a radio station group, whether it's a standalone station or a group, will not do it unless there's a bottom line to it. How do they do it from your perspective?
If it goes down to the sales department, you have got to sit down with the salespeople and drill it in their head somehow that this is a viable product that needs to be sold just like anything else you sell. And I think where some of the salespeople probably, this is just my opinion and just my perspective on how it looked like. It looked like, oh, I can only sell this for this, as opposed to spending my time and selling something bigger for this. So they can't escape what they should do. What they should do when they're going after the big clients is to also include this podcasting thing with it. If you want to go after your bigger clients and say that's where you're going to make your nut as a salary as a salesperson, fine. Take this and be proud of this other little extra thing that we have in addition to what we're selling you to add to the package.
Right.
Make it an add-on. And explain to them, like, this is also, like, it's great. I love the fact that you're advertising on a radio station, but this is actually up and coming as well, too. Why don't you be the first to get on this?
Right.
And sell it.
Right.
And you're not selling them a bill of goods. It's legit. But you have to believe in what you're selling. You have to believe in what you're doing.
Right.
In order to persuade people.
And I think that we have a generation of sales reps who have not been, you've been in the radio long enough to know, and I've been in it long enough to know, and you have actually enough too, that host-read commercials are extremely effective. And that's what podcasting is kicking butt with.
Right.
That piece is gone now because radio has changed itself so much that, like you said, play music, 3 minutes in, get out, don't say any more than you have to. There's no personality to it. I think reps don't understand that you can sell the product.
Right.
you can sell the product, and they're not allowing you to do that.
Right.
Well, you've hit on it when you said believe in what you're selling.
Right.
So you get a podcast host like you, and I hear people do, like you hear different people sell like a podcast. I've heard podcasts say, "Oh, try this toothbrush. Let me tell you about this toothbrush," and then they're going to spend whatever time they are talking about it, not in a 20 doctors recommend this, this, and this. I mean, this is an organic me talking about your product, or better yet, come in and talk about it with me. And give me the highlights and let us really go. And I think you're right. If you turn that into a value added service on the radio, where a salesperson come to a guy like me and say, "Hey, look, Randy and Loper have a podcast too." It's sort of akin to like the 15-second spot at midnight, right? It's like they're going to sell somebody that we're going to throw in like 5 of these at midnight. Not many people are listening, but you get it. And then you could even start it that way. But really, it gives somebody like the radio host a lot more freedom to sell your product.
Right. It does. Yeah, because they can actually talk about it for more than 30 seconds.
Right. And we've lost a generation of sales reps that have experienced radio when it was doing that on air.
Yeah.
I think that's the misconnection, because sales reps don't even know that it could happen.
Right. I when I left the station, I had a ton of personal endorsements, which were great. And probably if I would have stayed, there'd be more.
Right.
Because people were they wanted me talking about going out to the Polaris Grill for 60 seconds or whatever the case might be, as opposed to just running a commercial.
Right.
So yeah, it's right there. They should add it on. At least start that way.
Right.
And then when it becomes a bigger thing, which it will, then you can branch off and say you can either do it here on the radio station, or you could do it on our very successful podcast. And they both feed off of each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they need to realize.
Right. How did it work for DJs? I mean, I imagine this is, as a lawyer, I'm thinking contracts. It's like if I'm a DJ and I'm brought in from wherever to come in and host the morning drive or the afternoon drive, and I have my own podcast already going, or I'm going to start my own podcast, I just see eventually conflict there, where a guy like you is going to be, all right, hey, I already got my podcast. How much of a piece of the radio, or is the radio station going to try to take of that in the contract negotiations, and where does that all fall out?
And I think that's a very interesting point to me, because that's where I will be if my non-compete was up late November of 2018. So if I decide to pursue other radio options, I have this podcast that goes with me. Now, there are certain radio companies who are embracing the podcast world a little bit more, are into streaming a great bit in a huge way, and stream their stations all across the country. I'm aware of the fact that some of those companies would take whiskey business and do something with it. Yep. But how do I negotiate the monies? That's another conversation for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is something in there. And now I also consider it to be kind of an extra thing that I'm bringing with me.
You bet. I mean, that's how if I am representing you and negotiating for you, I'm thinking to myself, all right, this guy's been in radio for 25 years. He's done his podcast for 5 years. He's got this business, and this business who are paying him regularly to just be on and talk about their products or do whatever. Now, when you bring that to the table, I don't know sales and radio, but I do know this. It's like it's all about finding the business, right? It's right. Like the lead is everything.
Radio sales have local clients, and they also have national clients that national dollars that they go after as well. You're bringing leads to the table. You got to get paid out on that. You can.
Right.
It can be very profitable. I was always envious of the really successful salespeople at the radio station, because they were making twice as much as I was making in sales. And they were making it. When they were bringing me personal endorsements, I knew that they were making twice as much as I was making. But that's fine.
Yeah.
So you're good at what you do. Just take it to the next level,
right?
Or add this onto it,
right?
And you'll make more money,
right? Well, and I walk into agreements with the new podcasters. I mean, in my contract with them is I don't want that audio content when our contract ends. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah,
it's done. When we part ways, it's all yours. I'll give it to you. It's in a Dropbox. Boom, go with it. And, work with the next person, or maybe the podcast dies, whatever it might be. But I don't want any of it. But radio stations may be a little quirky about that I think a DJ, an on-air personality, has to really walk into it really, really smart.
If I'm negotiating from a perspective of a talent guy going into a radio, I would be very cautious, because you walk in, you start using their mics, you start using their recording devices, their processors, their bricks and mortar, and you're going to record your own podcast. You got to be careful who owns it. And, and at some juncture, if it takes off, and I think they will, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits on where the money goes. And
very interesting. I'll be aware of that when I get myself in that situation, if I get in that situation. But I don't. Once again, I will stress this: radio stations, you're listening. You want your jocks to be engaged in social media. You want them on Facebook. You want them on Instagram. You want them on Twitter. This is right there. It's in that same wheelhouse of exposure. So, embrace the podcast as well as all those other things as well.
All right. So you look at it as a business, Steve. Yeah. How do you approach it if you're a radio advertiser or looking at, possibly starting a podcast, but also use radio? What advice would you give?
In other words, if I am looking to do my own podcast and get my brand out there in one form or another, right? So I was lucky in a lot of ways in that I got to sort of hone my skill, so to speak, on air.
Right.
And dealing with stuff coming at me on a fly. Now, my profession, being a trial lawyer, sort of gives me somewhat of a skill set that I practice regularly on that. But it was very helpful to sort of see the inside of the radio station, understand what a microphone is, and then how to talk on the microphone and get comfortable with that. So doing your own podcast is not necessarily easy. And even I was worried, not even I, but I was worried when I started. I was like, I think I can keep it going. So I guess my first bit of advice is don't think it's easy to go do your own podcast. But if you're going to go advertise on the radio, what has worked for me was being on the radio. It's like not just saying, not have somebody read my spots, not have somebody record and hit play 10 times a day alone. It was me having my personality on radio. Now, if you can't do that, a podcast is a great way to do it. And I would say start with other podcasters. Start by doing what we're doing around this table, in the sense that you can get comfortable at a microphone, comfortable having people talk to you, comfortable talking to people, and then use that for training wheels for your own podcast, and then have a niche and enjoy it, right? But I would be careful now with my dollars. Like if I'm going to a radio station to say, I want to advertise with you, and they give me a price tag, I'd be very careful with my dollars on that right now. I never saw it as that being the product that I wanted. I wanted my personality to be reflected somehow on the air. And that I guess that's my advice. I mean, I would be cautious with going to a radio and doing traditional advertising, at least as a small business.
Yeah. And I'd have to agree. It pains me. And I got into radio because I love the audio medium.
Sure.
And the influence it has on us. Mm-hmm. And radio has changed in my 30 years. When I first started.
And mine as well.
We basically same era. It's a totally different beast right now than it was. And it's kind of what drove me out of it, because it's not the same. If I want to listen to music, I'll go to Spotify. I don't have to listen to a radio station to really listen to it. I hate saying that, but it's come to realization. And if I want to be entertained, I'm listening to a podcast. I'll find a podcast that'll entertain me or inform me. But I think you're right. It's be careful what you do. You got to be really careful with the dollars and such. That's do some homework. Do some homework.
Yeah. And I'll say that again. I'm not defending radio, but radio is still a great avenue to advertise on.
It is.
It's effective. But yeah, sure, be cautious and see where exactly how can I maximize these dollars?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't mean to be too critical of radio either. I mean, I love it. I love going on that show. And here's what I have learned, though. I mean, the other side of my coin is this. A lot of people listen to me on Wednesdays on that radio show, and there's a lot of listeners out there not listening to podcasts between those hours that I'm on, listening to that show. And I think the other bit of wisdom I have is don't sell that short either, right? I mean, there's still a lot of value there. But I guess I came into it from that end, not the spend money on advertising end. I got here first, and then I spent money on advertising, and they work together. Like that's sort of where we started.
Right.
But going the opposite, I don't know that I ever would have done it. I don't know that I ever would have been sold by a radio salesperson saying, "You as this lawyer can make a lot of money in return for advertising your spots on the radio." Now, I'm not saying that's not true. I might have been able to do it, but I don't think I necessarily would have been sold on that. I would not have gotten my head around that, particularly in the internet age and everything else. And I think being mindful of what's coming up behind us, this generation of consumers, is different than what I have ever seen and what I think most of people older have ever seen. I mean, we've never seen anything like it. Everything is done online. Everything is done quickly. Everything is like you're going to Spotify. They're not going to listen. They're not going to find their music necessarily on the air. I mean, it's going to be found where they want it and where it's saved or wherever it is. So I don't know what it's all about, but I would encourage anybody to podcast. It's a blast.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It is a lot of fun. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy it. And like I said, I think it's made me a better broadcaster. It's made me a far better interviewer. That skill has increased tenfold just from doing the podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn from it, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we've answered the world problems.
Have we?
I think so. This is where I wanted to go with it, though. Thank you for the discussion. Finally, nice to really meet you, too.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, I meant to ask you, too, you're doing some live stuff, too. I know Steve and I have kicked around trying to get Lawyer Talk live on stage. You were at Podcast Festival.
I was at the Podcast Festival, and we had a blast doing that. If you can get on board with that this year when it rolls around, do.
Absolutely.
And since I also come from a comic background, I'll be talking with the Funny Bone here in Columbus, and we're going to do a whiskey business podcast comedy show.
Oh, sweet.
So basically it will be, I'll introduce the podcast. I'll have a comedian come up and do 15 minutes. Then he'll do 15 minutes with me. Almost like a talk show, like a variety show, but it'll be the podcast. He'll podcast with me for 15 minutes, and we'll do that with 3 comedians. They'll go up do 15 and then sit down with me for 15 and then so forth and so on. And, once again, from the technical arena, do we stream that live? Is it just recorded for later? Don't know. But, do we bring in video cameras? I have the capability because we're also filmmakers. I mentioned John Whitney and myself. We're filmmakers as well. So we're in that world too. So we have the lights and the equipment to do all that stuff if we need to do it. How do we structure it? I don't know. I just want to get butts in the seats.
Yep.
And make that happen so that it's successful.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing live stuff is
it's a whole new world.
It's a shot of adrenaline. Now, I come from a live performance background doing stand up. So that was my first big thing in radio. It was like, I can't hear the laughter. I don't know if they're laughing. I can't hear the laughter. But that's I dig that. That live, spontaneous.
Oh, there's an adrenaline. That's like trying cases. You would be good at it, probably.
My mother always wanted me to be a lawyer.
Yeah, you did the right thing.
Yeah, she wanted me to be a lawyer. She always said when I got out of trouble, you'd be a good defense lawyer.
There you go. No, there is adrenaline rush, though. Being live without a net, well, that's what you're doing, right? I couldn't imagine. Stand-up would scare the bejesus out of me, man. I would be like, I don't think I could do it.
It's like going out
I've always
naked.
made this joke to my attorney friends. I've always said, like, obviously it's too late for me to go to law school, but if I had, like, what's one thing you want to do before you die? I said, I would like to do the closing argument. I would like to be the closer. I would like to come up. I would like to, after everything's going on, do the closing argument, talk to the jury, do that speech to the jury. I want to do a closing argument. I want to say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I'm not really a lawyer, but is this case really about the law?
Not at that point, it isn't.
He could give you insight on that.
It's never about the law.
That's right. I want to close.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's
Steve,
funny.
Thank you for jumping on at the last minute. Once I knew he was coming in, I knew we could bring 3 different perspectives on radio and podcasting, and obviously we scratched the surface, but it's just our...
Do you drink whiskey?
Not anymore. I am now 3 years without alcohol.
Wow.
I just liked it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I never got in trouble or I never had any issues. But one day I just woke up and thought, I don't think I'm going to drink alcohol anymore. And I've never looked back, but I did love whiskey.
Well, we've had guests that do not imbibe on whiskey business, so I'd be very curious. We should cross-pollinate here on the podcast.
Let's do it for sure.
And get you on whiskey. You do not have to drink. In fact, that just means more for us.
I'd mess with your keto diet anyway.
Mess with my keto diet,
Yeah, exactly.
The keto, does that work?
Oh, yeah.
Does it work?
Oh, I feel great.
How long you been on it?
Almost a month now.
Yeah?
And let me tell you, I feel awesome. Almost euphorically awesome. I mean, there's almost like there's a point of euphoria where you just feel like you can conquer the world early on, and then you just sort of realize the little things. I was hunting over the weekend. It was muzzleloader season, so I was out hunting and I was hiking up this huge hill. Had my 12-year-old or soon to be 12-year-old son with me, and I said, "We got to climb up that hill." And he's huffing air and doing It's like I walked up there, and I felt great, right? And it's not that I'm exercising a lot or doing anything like that. Just my joints feel better. I rest better. My sleep is better. My awake time is better. Everything is just working better without really, if you could just say, don't eat, everybody would agree with this. Don't eat a lot of sugar.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Don't eat a lot of processed carbohydrates.
Food.
Yeah. That's great. So if you cut those things out of your life, you'll feel a lot better.
Makes sense.
You got to cut out whiskey too, right?
No, you could work that in.
You can work that in?
Yeah,
all right.
yeah, it's
all
like,
right, maybe I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
I can deal without the excessive sugars, the processed sugars, and some of the carbohydrates.
Yeah.
I'm a man who cannot live without his bread from time to time.
I get you.
Anyway, we're going down rabbit holes that you talked about.
I know. That's okay. It's not a problem at all. Thank you both for being a part of Note to Feature Me.
All right.
Our pleasure. Thank you.